This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support.
Hybrid Cloud Show, episode 54. I'm Aaron.
I'm Gary.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Shane.
Welcome to the show about public cloud, private cloud, and everything in between. Our views here are ours and not those of our employers. So, Shane, I had a rare pleasure of meeting you in person at Kubecon, and I was keen to go through some of the things that we saw or learnt there beyond the sort of general rundowns of Kubecon stuff that you'll see in the media that was covering it. Do you want to give me a couple of key points for you of things that you saw or conversations you had that really were particularly, resonant of where things are going?
Sure. So I think the two interesting sort of signals I was seeing across the conference were big shocker for the first one. It was AI is still continuing to be very loud.
What?
I know. And also, I think everyone on the booths or the vendor area, I think every one of them had some vague tagline of, we do AI, but good, which got really old really quickly. And I saw agentic everywhere, which infuriated me. But the other possibly more interesting thing for our audience was there was a lot more noise about sovereign cloud. I saw a lot of people talking about it, people who spoke to me about it. I saw a lot of vendors pitching that in their products as something that was a compelling offering. So it was quite cool to see that signal happening in the industry.
Yes, I was talking to a few analysts and the sovereign cloud topic was big there. I think it's a pretty hot topic for everyone, particularly, I suppose, because this was KubeCon EU. And so it's a bigger deal in Europe, perhaps, than it is in North America.
When we say sovereign cloud, are we talking about just running on AWS EU instances? Or are we talking about an actual new instance or collection of instances that make a sovereign cloud?
That's a really good question that is itself, I think, one of the questions a lot of people have.
I had heard repeatedly frustrations that we echoed in a previous episode about the EU and AWS sovereign cloud and sharing the same concerns we shared about it not really being sovereign effectively.
And I think that the sorts of things that we spoke about in that episode are effectively, echoed in a lot of the comments I heard around it too, that not necessarily all negative, but like we said, it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. And for some people, it's going to be enough, and for other people, it's not going to be enough. And they just need to understand, what it is that they're trying to achieve and what they're getting.
Great. So we've solved everyone's problems. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was definitely, though, it was a lot of people, in their bullet points of AI, et cetera, was we're sovereign cloud. So that is now a compelling sales point for people to be like, we'll run somewhere sovereign. There was a couple of EU hosting providers as well who were asking and looking for solutions for how do we do a control plane in the EU that could not compete with an AWS or an Azure, but at least would be good enough, particularly for enterprise businesses. That were some of the conversations I was having, which is quite cool. There may be some demand for an EU equivalent to AWS happening in the industry, which I'm excited. Maybe there'll be some more momentum behind it, hopefully.
I also felt that there was an undercurrent in some of the discussions that it was the first time for some of them that they saw the importance of open source as being important in relation to sovereignty. So the idea that if you've got something proprietary, then that proprietary thing is always wedded, at least to some degree, to the country that it comes from, and it has an influence from that country. Whereas if something is open source, then it is a little bit more country neutral.
Yeah, I think more companies are hedging their bets a little by looking at products that offer some way to offboard from the paid for solution onto something open source. And I think that cloud providers have largely skirted this requirement to some extent. Like there's a lot of proprietary stuff running AWS. Yes, you might run open source applications on that, but a lot of complexity is baked into vendor specific AWS stuff. And so they've had a bit of a free ride being like, well, you can run all your open source stuff. But I think people are starting to feel that, oh, I'm locked into this vendor that happens to be based in a country with an orange madman running it. That's a concern. So yeah, I think you're right. Open source is becoming more important again.
I also thought there was an interesting overlay of some of the, I think it's the CRA requirements around, understanding what goes into your products and the security lifecycle of those things. And again, sort of how that folds into the same discussions that we've been having for years around things like SBOMs and supply chains and trusted open source and how you know that you're going to get updates to your open source and knowing what's in the things that you're shipping and all of those kinds of sensible stuff, but in a different guise because there's a different piece of legislation that people are looking at.
Yeah, we're having to deal with my company's CRA right now and the challenges or new requirements around that. It's only a good thing, but it's definitely something to deal with. For anyone unaware, that's new legislation. The EU is assembling to try to get more responsibility around computing in general. That's probably a really poorly way to describe it, but I've skimmed the details. I know I need to understand this, but it's the point. But that's not today.
With the standard, I am not a lawyer caveat, right, Shane?
Yeah, absolutely. Computer stuff needs good. EU angry.
I also felt, without getting into it in too much detail, like there was even more of a move of all of the AI stuff into the Kubernetes space, and that as an orchestration platform for both sides of that equation, training and inference, it's really become a standard platform. I know it's always going to be a bit biased when you're at Kubecon, that they're always talking about Kubecon, but I felt like that was very much the platform of choice for a lot of companies doing that at all levels.
Yes, it does look like Kubernetes is going to be the AI target platform of choice from what I can see from the conference, to be honest. But again, yeah, you're right. It's probably quite biased. I think one of the other things I did see in the conference relating to AI, and I want to not talk about it too much because there's probably a ton of noise there, was people are starting to get a little nervous about just chucking a load of AI at their company and being and expecting it to all work out. So I think that, again, I will repitch platform engineering, but I think it's become a bit of an accidental savior of AI. I think as engineering teams start to adopt more AI and you can rely less on like vague boundaries where that might be covered by your company's culture or communication between humans. As AI does more stuff for engineers, more explicit contracts between teams are going to become more important. It just happened platform engineering's doing a lot of that already. You've got your product, you're selling it internally, people are consuming that product, very explicit boundaries. And I worry almost that platform engineering may end up getting consumed by the AI blob into something like AI automations more so than platform engineering. So I'm a little worried about that, but also realize that platform engineering continues to be pretty relevant.
Yes, I think that's right. I think there are a lot of people who are now engaging with the platform engineering problem from a different perspective. And it's not that surprising. We saw it in the Kubernetes space where Kubernetes became this sort of big thing that everyone felt they needed to do. They needed to containerize their workloads, go cloud native, and it became a sort of board mandate that was kind of loosely understood. And you had to solve that problem in consistent ways across the organization without having every developer go crazy directions with it. And I wonder if we're in a similar sort of place where here there's a whole lot of teams who are trying to, quotes, do AI, and everyone's taking different approaches. And we're again in that same sort of part of the life cycle where getting the coherence and consistency of platform engineering is going to be crucial.
Yeah, it's almost like as the engineers step back. So let's say you're an engineer in a team and you're now starting to use AI to do stuff in your company. You as an engineer may know the boundaries of where your team is responsible and where other teams' responsibility begins. And so That's fine. But as AI has no context for this, these boundaries between teams, and I'm not just talking about engineering teams and infrastructure teams, I'm talking about like the data team and the mobile team. Those boundaries between those two teams aren't obvious, maybe. They're not explicit. There's not an API between one team and another. And AI's crossing those boundaries, I think, is like AI in general is going to be a problem, but that is going to be a huge problem. And I think the discipline that kind of happened with platform engineering, I think more teams are going to have to learn if they're going to try do this stuff safely. Yeah, I'm pretty worried.
Sean, you've started twitching.
I'm thinking about this, like Shane was kind of alluding to, from a software engineering perspective of how is this going to affect my company, my org, my department, not just like my team and my code. Yeah, I share a lot of the same concerns. There's let's just say it's not uncommon to have people in management that are not technical and push the fiscal, narrative as whatever makes thing go up and to the right, that just builds up tech debt, builds up bad practices, and then trying to undo that accumulated tech debt is painful. Now imagine that times, what's a fair number? 20 due to the output that is going to come out of this AI stuff. I'm worried.
I was doing a talk about platform engineering in the age of AI, and I literally had like a slide in there. I got rid of it for something else, but it was basically just a tidal wave, which was just AI slop, and then like platform engineers standing there with holding Terraform, effectively trying to like protect against this. But the wave is unfortunately coming. The slop wave is coming, and we got to deal with it, unfortunately.
It's powerful. Did you guys know they made Kubernetes itself now has an AI gateway resource?
No, I did not know that. What does that mean?
So you guys know about the new gateway API that's coming out to replace ingresses, right?
Not in any detail. Can you give us a couple of sentences?
At a high level, an ingress was just too constrictive and not really what was needed between different tiers of people providing Kubernetes aspects. For example, there's the Kubernetes operators, the provisioners, and then the users. So people who probably be like the big clouds, right? Those would be like, I provision Kubernetes clusters themselves. I manage the DNS. I manage the gateways, right? I manage the network side of this thing. And they have their responsibilities they're responsible for. And below them, there is, okay, now I am my company's platform team. And then I am in charge of wiring up my certs and my things to be able to provision my URLs to get traffic into my cluster. And then there's the actual users themselves who actually would say, okay, and then I need a DNS entry for X and I need a DNS entry for Y. So the Gateway API is coming to basically give that granular level of control across Kubernetes that was lacking from the ingress. It's not a huge issue, but it is going to cause pain because a lot of people are going to have to start replacing their ingress resources with gateways. And there's whole entire projects dedicated to that. And there was a big thing about the Nginx ingress being not maintained anymore. So now everyone's kind of scrambling for new options.
There is a de facto option now, isn't there? Because literally I saw at Kubecon someone saying, yeah, we're the new Nginx ingress, basically.
I'd be curious to hear who said that. From my very outside opinion, the team that I'm looking at, or the product I'm looking at to replace it, is Envoy.
I can't remember. I think it was them. Hang on, there was one open source one who said that. I was like, oh, that's a pretty ballsy thing to say.
Someone's going to be disappointed they didn't give you a brighter business card.
Or some sort of sweet swag that I could just pull up.
Yeah, some socks or something.
Yeah.
I've got some good ScyllaDB socks somewhere. There you go. They can get a free mention for that.
We were giving out socks. They were great.
The bar is so low, guys. Okay, but the point was, this is a powerful influence, so much so that there's a new AI gateway API coming that is particular to controlling AI usage within Kubernetes. This thing is literally made to do like token-based rate limiting and like access controls for inference APIs. We're talking about like AI-specific protocols and stuff. Like, that's how impactful this is.
That sounds interesting, Sean. Can you give a little more detail into where this AI fits in to do what? I'm very confused.
I personally can't, because this is beyond what my day-to-day is, and I'm not involved in these conversations. I did attend several good sessions about the Gateway API at the local conferences that I was going to, like Texas Linux Fest. That's why I know about this. There's actually a representative from Nginx who gave a presentation on that. I thought it was very good. As far as the AI Gateway is supposed to address, there's a blog post that we can link to in the show notes. This literally says, user stories we're addressing. Platform operators providing managed access to external AI services. I don't think that belongs in Kubernetes. I feel like there's other ways to do that, but okay. Developers requiring inference failover across multiple cloud providers. Maybe, but still other ways to achieve that. Compliance engineers enforcing regional restrictions. Again, I don't think that's a Kubernetes thing to solve. And organizations centralizing AI workloads on dedicated clusters. All right, that one I can give you, but still, again, there are other ways to do that. I don't know if creating a whole entire new Kubernetes resource is a way to do that, but that's my uneducated opinion.
Yes, none of these things sound like they belong in Kubernetes. They sound like something you'd want to do outside of the cluster to me. And I feel like there is probably a danger here of starting to bring too many things inside of Kubernetes that historically wouldn't belong there. This feels like a little bit of a red flag.
It's what they call project maturity.
Well, yeah, project maturity, but I do wonder what else we're going to end up bringing inside of Kubernetes that just doesn't belong in what in my mind should just be a workload scheduler.
It's a giant state machine. That's all it's ever been. And when you start doing that scope creep, that's when rot sets in.
Yeah, there are bits of it that become less maintained, or it just becomes this real monolith that is a pain in the ass to run. Not that it wasn't a pain in the ass to run already.
I'm not super close to it, but my understanding is that one of the challenges in the OpenStack world was too many components doing too many things, such that you ended up with every deployment having a different set of components.
It's a shame that they've decided now to introduce scope creep because they feel left out probably of the AI game that's happening.
Does almost feel a little bit like that, doesn't it? We've got to have our 2 pennies worth of AI, so we're going to introduce this new gateway API for AI, or to protect people from AI, because we're doing AI properly, which is message of the week from every single vendor.
Yeah. Was there anything interesting you learned from Kubecon, Aaron?
I had a little bit of a biased view. I spent a lot of my time in meetings, but I think that a lot of the discussions I had sort of suggested to me that Kubernetes had got comfortably boring. And I say that, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I think I've talked before about where we went in these sort of cycles, and I felt like that happened a bit with OpenStack, where it was cool and everyone was doing things, and then it reached a certain point where, the telcos started doing everything in OpenStack, and it got mature, and then all the cool kids moved over to doing, Kubernetes. And I sort of feel like we're at that kind of maturity stage now where you have different discussions about things like compliance and long-term maintenance and, sovereignty and, how do I keep my CISO happy and doing things consistently and all of those kinds of discussions, much more than, how do I make it do stuff? And so I think there was a lot more of that kind of long-term maintenance, that long-term kind of thinking around supply chains and where are my containers coming from and how do I trust them, and those sort of things that people find a bit boring, but that if you're doing this stuff more centrally or in a way that has to sit there for a long time become important. So a lot of those were the sort of discussions I was having around basically how to make Kubernetes boring and just work, but just work in a way that keeps your CISO happy and, that you can stand by for a long period of time.
Then that's great. Just leave it there. Let it be boring. I don't want it to be interesting. It's the thing that underpins all of the exciting stuff that my company does.
When I walked around the vendor area and was looking at all the companies, all the different products, doing lots of different things effectively on top of it, it made me realize, like, I really equate Kubernetes to like Linux almost. It's that layer on where everyone runs stuff on top of, right? And the reason Linux was horrendously successful is because, like, it stayed in its lane of being a kernel. It didn't decide to become an operating system and step beyond that and start trying to compete with the people building stuff on top of it. And so, yeah, I would also worry that all of this amazing community and industry around it, like, starts to get frustrated if the core project starts to compete with it, right, in various weird and wonderful ways. Or it just loses focus, right? It's successful. This is probably as good as it gets. Like, enjoy it.
Yeah, I almost want a bunch of cottage industry to spin up around it and do all the shiny bits, and then I can choose to just ignore that if I don't need it. And I can just schedule my workloads and have traffic come in and out of the cluster and permission it and isolate it in the way that I want to. And then if there's a vendor that does something cool that meets a requirement I have, be that satisfying my CISO and putting in something that does dependency management or SBOMs, great. I can go and grab that, much the same as I can the Linux kernel. It just does the thing it does, and it does a pretty good job of it most of the time. That's almost what I want Kubernetes to be. I don't want it to start getting involved in all of this extracurricular nonsense.
I did end up giving a keynote at Kubecon, only a very, very short one, but around the European Space Agency. And it's essentially along these same lines, like the idea that as an agency that's launching multi-year missions but wants to have a consistent platform where they can change out the hardware underneath and all of that. It's the sort of things you're saying, right? Like, you start to think about how difficult a problem that is, where you've got long-running missions for years, but you're wanting to have this nice consistent development platform that you can change things about without worrying about the underlying hardware failure and that sort of thing.
Well, I do wonder if we have this problem a little bit as an industry. I mean, I've certainly worked with clients before that were using a bunch of really boring but stable services on a cloud provider and constantly getting badgered to go and adopt the cool new stuff. But actually, they were using the old boring stuff to accomplish some pretty cool, interesting things. And they were happy that the cloud provider and its old services just ticked along in the background. You know, I'm talking about things like S3 or Aurora they were using pretty heavily, which I suppose at one point was new, cool stuff. But actually, they weren't services that anyone found particularly interesting. They were never going to speak at a keynote because they weren't using an LLM or some kind of fancy new thing. But they were just ticking along, doing cool things with Kubernetes and Aurora and some object storage. And that was fine. That made them pretty cool to work with because infrastructure, very conservative, mission, actually pretty cool.
I kind of want that as a conference, like maintainers conference, you know? I don't want to hear about your new shiny stuff. Like, talk about some scar tissue from some lessons learned where you iterated responsibly and just kind of did some cool stuff with some old tech. Like, that could be quite good.
Yeah, tell me about your cool thing you built with EC2 and SQS. That's fine. I'm happy with that. If it works, it works.
I would agree with that though, Aaron. Like, I think day 2 has become a bigger thing with Kubernetes in general. I guess lots of people have adopted it now and they've realized that everything's blowing up because nothing's particularly organized well, and they're starting to worry about all the things they probably should have worried about at the start, but they were too focused on the shiny new.
Yeah, I knew someone who used to say, who's going to wash the windows? It's all good fun building all of these cool things when the technologies are new and shiny. But once you've put those things into production and they're sitting there and it's 5-10 years down the line, nobody knows what they do anymore. Who's keeping them up to date? Who's washing the windows?
Well, historically, the infrastructure team, but we don't really have that anymore.
I think the answer these days is someone else who's not me because I'll be gone by then.
That used to be it. Now it's just whatever LLM is going to finally replace me, right? Good luck.
All right, it's probably time for me to go and wash my own windows. But if you've got any questions or comments, do please send those in to show@hybridcloudshow.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, I've been Aaron.
I've been Gary.
I've been Sean.
And I've been Shane.
See you later.